Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day. For the tutorial today we're going to learn a little Yule Tree decoration. Now I've added an ear wire to mine. I think I may wear these over the festive season as earrings, but if you don't fancy that, instead of adding an ear wire you can wear them as a pendant, or you can simply use them as decor around the home. Let's head down to the board and take a closer look. So this is the tree we're going to make today, and we'll be using 1mm 18 gauge wire and 0.5mm 24 gauge wire. You can also add garlands in small beads. These are 3mm faceted round amethysts. I'll also be adding in a pair of ear wires and a couple of jump rings, just in case your ear wires have a different orientation to those that you need. So I've got my bits and bobs ready to go, and we'll start with the heavier wire. So the piece that I have made is crafted from an 18-inch length of that 1mm 18 gauge wire, and the final piece measures approximately 2 inches top to bottom. So you can of course size that down smaller or larger if you prefer. So I'm just going to scoot those beads out of the way slightly because we don't need them just yet. Now in terms of tools, I've got my professional flush cutters, I've got my bent chain nose pliers, but you can use any flat facing pliers, and I'm going to be using my memory wire finishing pliers, which have a 2mm and a 4mm pin on them. Let's start by warming that wire through to make sure it's ready and soft and fluid, ready to do its job for us. So once that has been smoothed through, we are just going to make sure that the end is flush cut neatly, so there's no jagged bits left over. And I'm going to create a small double spiral utilising the 2mm pin on my memory wire finishing pliers. You can of course use your round nose pliers, or indeed your multi-step bail making pliers. So once I've got the spiral started off, I'm going to switch to flat facing pliers to generate that double spiral around the central aperture. Once I've got that double spiral, I'm going to give it a little bit of a smush to make it nice and strong, although you do have the option to hammer this piece later. What I'm going to do now is just to make sure that the spiral travels 2 full rotations around from the cut end, and then I'm just going to open it out very gently. That just gives us a really nice aperture later on in which we can fix some additional strengthening wire. Going to add a little more smoothness and warmth through that wire, and then going to grab in my multi-step bail makers or my memory wire finishing pliers. Now I'm going to offer them in just like so, and I'm allowing the small side of those pliers to sit just away about 1 or 2mm from that double spiral, and I'm going to use the larger side, the 4mm pin, to generate a loop. You can see how that sits. Let me just drop that down into the focal zone. And you can see that that was created in this fashion. So I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side, but at each juncture I'm going to just add a little bit of warmth to this wire. Now I'm working with silver wire. It's a nice bright festive colour. You can work with whatever colour you fancy. Once I've got that nice and warm, I'm going to try to recreate the same size of loop on the other side. So if I just add that into, slightly lower, get it into the focal zone, and then bring that wire back across. Now you can of course, once you've got that in position, remove the pin and put it back in again. One of the reasons I'm at pains to make sure that the wire is nice and fluid is because I want to be able to make any changes I need to. So if you're making these as earrings, you will want to then match it up to the first one to make sure that they are the same size approximately. So that's reasonably close together. Once they're on opposite sides of the head, I don't think it will be much of a problem to have them in that fashion. So again, I'm going to warm through the wire. You will hear it clanking on the desk because it's quite a long piece of wire to work with. Now this time I'm going to put the small pin immediately adjacent to that first curve. Draw the wire all the way around. Now the pin has come away slightly, so I'm just going to reshape that. Now the reason I'm making sure that curve takes place with the small pin adjacent to the first curve is because it allows me to recreate that on the other side. So you can flip from one side to the other very, very easily. So pop the pin into position, bring that wire back in the opposite direction. So it's kind of like one of those scary mountain roads, switching backwards and forwards, and those little curves are getting slightly further apart from one another. But the way I'm measuring it is to use the pliers themselves to generate that shape. So bring that back in the opposite direction, naturally enough catching on everything. And then again, you would want to just make sure that they're keeping to reasonably the same size. Now that has got slightly too large. So the way that we can fix this is just open that out slightly. And then we're going to rotate around to shrink down where one loop sits next to or below the other loop. So as I flip this over to the other side, you can see that's made the problem much larger on the other side. And that's the whole reason for showing you this, is to show you how to fix it. It's also to remind you this is exactly why we repeatedly warm that wire. So all I've done is I've moved the pin and brought that back along. And by the time we've hammered this in a couple of minutes, you shouldn't be able to see any deviation. It will look as if everything was what we meant it to do the first time. So that again is a little bit closer, but if you need to change where the curve sits, you can do so. If you can't straighten it out to warm it, you can very easily just rub it like so. Pop the pin back in and then just close that over slightly. So I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to keep going until I have the same number of curves as I have on the first piece. So just keep referring to the first one you made, or make them side by side, one turn at a time. So I'll meet you back here in just a moment when I've recreated that form. So I've recreated the same number of loops at approximately the same distance apart. And again, if you hold that up and you see that there are any minor differences, you can just give that a little bit of a move until it sits exactly how you want it to. That's the beauty of working with wire. It's not always completely set in stone from the first moment. So when you get down to the very last section of wire, obviously there's not enough here to create another full loop and turn back. So we're going to trim that wire as if it was at the point that we would have made that curve take place. And then instead of the large side, we're going to use the small side, or you could use closer to the tip of your round nose pliers, and we're just going to recreate one of those double spirals. So get yourself a nice round form going and then keep rotating that until it sits approximately centrally down at the bottom of your little tree stack. So you can take a little more time than I have to make sure that your two pieces are identical. This one looks slightly wider at the bottom, much like myself. So what we will do next is just ensure that we're happy with the two pieces being as similar as possible, and then we will hammer that into shape. I took a few extra moments there just to make sure that they were a little more similar, and it's the same piece of wire. So by the time we've hammered it, you won't be able to see any minor imperfections in the wire. Now I've used silver for the tree, but in a moment we're going to be using a lovely contrasting gold wire. Love it if you had green wire or brown wire, bronze wire, copper wire. All of the colours that you think might look good on a design like this are absolutely usable. That's the beauty of making your own decorative items. You can match in with whatever your colourway feels like for the day. Let's head back down to the board and we'll add a little bit of strength to this design. Now, in exactly the same way we opened the spiral away from the wire at the top, we're going to do the same down at the base, just because it makes it slightly easier for us to tie everything together if there's a little extra access point. So what we're going to do now is to hammer this tree design, this squiggle, but we're going to do it a little bit at a time. So we need to just kind of support from curve to curve as we strike down at the top. And you may find that sometimes things spring apart or open. So I'm just going to close that up slightly. Now I've got a little bit of structural rigidity up at the top, which is great. That's exactly what we need. What we always need to be looking out for when we're hammering this design is that you don't allow those little loops or curves of wire to sit on top of each other whilst you're striking down. So if you want to focus on just a couple at a time, and you can see there's some minor deviations in the wire just here from where I reformed the curve, but I'm just going to push down really firmly, bringing these top 4 arc sections. I'm just going to push down so that they sit against each other but not on top of each other. This in and of itself already adds a little to the strength of the design, but what we're going to do is the same thing on the other side now, and I'll probably focus on the top 3 and the other half of that double spiral at the top to begin with. Again, I'm kind of pushing in multiple directions, downwards to keep them on the block, but also inwards to make sure that they sit firmly against but not on top of each other. So once you have the outer edges nice and strong, you can support them and tap very gently in the middle, minding your fingers of course. Now this curvature is very natural because we've hammered at one end but we haven't hammered at the other. So the way to fix this is to continue on down in exactly the same way, pushing the curves at the bottom of the design together. So I'm going to concentrate to begin with on the 3 lower of those curving sections. Before switching back to the other side, and you can just very softly bring that back to flat as you go. Now if you remember, we did 1, 2, 3, 4, but we're going to continue with the lower 3, but all the time supporting as much as we can manage. Once you've got a little more strength in the outer sections, you can again focus on the centre, making sure that you keep those end pieces sitting flat, not sitting on top of each other. And then if you wish to, you can flip this over just to get it nice and flat again. So you should have got a reasonable amount of strength in the design now. If you are making them as earrings, I always like them to be symmetrically opposing one another. So if my spiral starts by moving in a clockwise direction on the piece in my hand, then I want it to be moving anti-clockwise in the other one as we move on to the second part of this design. We're going to create almost a trunk-like design of weaving down the centre of the tree. I have an 8-inch length of 0.5mm or 24 gauge wire, and I'm just going to lie that over the top of my design, bearing in mind what we said about which direction the spiral is forming if you want them to be equal and opposite to each other, opposite symmetry. I'm going to allow about 3/4 of an inch just over the top of the design, and because my loop, my first little curve, starts over on the right hand side, that's where I'm going to focus. I'm going to wrap 3 times around the section of wire that literally just comes away from that spiral. So let's get 3 really neat and tidy wraps. And then when you bring that wire back through for the last time, there's only a tiny little tail left, we're going to trim that away as close to inside as we can get. Get that in the scrap pot, and then making sure that that's really nice and neat and tidy. We've got 3 little wraps around the wire as it comes away from the spiral, and I'm then just going to make sure that that sits centrally underneath the spiral at the top. When I'm happy with how that looks, I'm going to give it a little pinch. Very gentle, but just enough to show the wire that that's exactly where I want it to stay. Now, it's harder to explain this weave than it is to do the weave. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to work by bringing the gold fine wire down the front of the design, and each time there's a gap. So on this side, the gap occurs here, which is lower than the gap at the top here. So the first gap is on the right because my first curve was on the right. So I'm going to bring the wire down inside the first gap and then pull it up on the back of the design, keeping everything in position. What I'm going to do then is to take it to the opposite side. So I've just gone to the right, so now I'm going to the left. I'm going to pull the wire back through to the front again, over the face of the design. Just give that a quick pinch. Now the next easy place for me to access is on the left, because we've just wrapped around the first part of the first left curve. So I'm going to draw the tail of wire down in the gap, and then I'm going to bring the wire up the back. So every time there's a gap, we'll bring the wire inside, and what I'm going to do now is flick back over to the right hand side with that tail. Pull it all the way back to the centre and pull it down the front. What we'll do just now is give that a very gentle pinch to keep it in position. You can use your nails or pliers to hold that just so. So all I want to do is wrap one little middle bit of curve together at a time. So we've just gone through on the right hand side, so let's have a look. The next easiest place to get through would be on this side. So let's bring that wire back through, up the rear of the design, and then we have a gap here that we can use. So we'll bring that through and down. Like I said, it's harder to explain than it is to actually do. So over the front, and then we'll take it in just here. That's the next available access point. So bring the wire in and through and up the back, and then switch from one side to the other. So pop in on the other side, down the centre. Keep it nice and neat and tidy as you go, and make sure that your curvy bits don't go on top of one another. They're snugly side by side. You have to imagine that they're between 2 sheets of glass. So it's a very easy technique to master. Bring that through and up the back, flick to the other side, down. Bring it through. So we had to flick to the other side, so over here, up the back, and then on the opposite side, up and through. So this time we need to go down over here, making sure that you're not bringing those curves too tight together, and then up on the rear side, and then through the opposite gap. So it is a very easy little weave. It's almost like sewing the tree together. So the next available access point, and you'll see that there is an access point here, but if you bring the wire through, you'll see immediately that you've gone wrong. So bring that back over the top. Here's an access point, bring the wire through. And then it comes up on the back of the design, and then you go on this side. So it's just switching from one side to the other. Keep those little wraps nice and neat and tidy, and you can see that the next side we need to go through is here, up on the rear of the design. Switch to the other side, down. Make sure that those little wraps are neat and tidy, and then we'll go through one more on that side, up through the last remaining gap, and then down. So I'm just going to pinch those together with my pliers to make them neat and tidy and straight. And then I'm going to finish with 3 wraps on the lowest section here. So again, we allowed a little bit of space just inside the spiral like so. So I'm going to bring the tail of wire up and through, all the way around once, twice, and then you'll see we've got 3 visible wraps to match up at the top. And again, we will finish by cutting as close to inside the design as possible. So let's trim that away inside like so. And then give that a gentle little encourage to sit neatly. give it a squish. Now we are looking for these to be as if they're between two panes of glass. So if it's a little tight, what you can do is just draw them down like so, so that they sit neat and tidy. So I've tried to keep that spine, if you like, up the centre of the tree, just pushing it together with my nails to make sure that it's as neat and tidy as possible. Don't over tension it, or you will find that the loopy bits on the ends of the tree start to overlap a bit. So just take your time, and once you've got that looking as similar as possible to the first one, we have the option then to add some garlands or some tinsel if you prefer. Let's head back down to the board and we will crack on. So to add on our garlands, you can use scrap lengths of that 0.5mm 24 gauge wire. I had a little left over from the last section, and you probably need only about 4 inches per segment of garland. So if you've got scrap lengths, you can absolutely use them. So I'm going to try and create an equal and opposite design to the first one that I made, just in case I do want to wear them as earrings. So I am going to lay my finer gauge wire over the top. Now I have a length of about 12 inches, but like I say, you really only need scrap lengths of 3 or 4 inches. And I'm going to lay that equal and opposite to where the start point is on the other design. And I'm going to allow around about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch over the top of the bottom-most swoop or arc shape on the tree design. So I'm going to wrap 3 times and make sure that it's really sturdy in its connection point. So this is quite a different animal. There's only 0.1 of a millimetre difference, but it really does feel very different to that 0.4mm or 26 gauge that I frequently work with. However, because I wanted a little more rigidity in this design, a little more longevity, especially if they're going to be worn during the festive season, I just wanted to make that a little stronger. So I'm going to flip that over to the other side and make sure that I trim the wire as close to the inside of the design as possible. Tuck down any sticky uppy bits, flip it back over in the opposite direction. Now I'm just going to scooch that so that it's the widest point and give it a little pinch. I'm then going to load on some beads. Now I have 3mm round amethysts. They are kind of mixed. Some are creamy, some are translucent, and some are beautiful purple. So I'm just going to load a bunch of these on so that I can get a nice, lazy, relaxed swoosh of beaded wire moving up to the other side of the tree. So I've added on my beads and I've put a nice delicate lazy meander in that wire. So you could use a few more beads or a few fewer beads if you prefer. What we would do at the other end of that little meander is to wrap in exactly the same way as we did at the start of that tinsel or garland, by wrapping 3 times and then cutting away. So I'm just going to pinch that into position whilst I bring the wire around, poke it through the end. Now I have chosen to move up 3 of those little kind of branch loops. Let's just pull that into position. So 1, 2, 3, opposite, point to point, and then you can either come back in exactly the same way, or you can do what I'm going to do, which is to add a second garland. And this is a great way to use up little scraps of wire. So I've got 1 more rotation of wire to go around the end there before I draw that all the way over the back to the rear of the design and trim away before tucking the end neatly down inside the design. So let's give that a little squish and a little squish. So what I will do to mirror the first one is skip a little bundle, start again here, and then go all the way up to the top on the other side. Now it's not completely the same meander because this moves up 3 and this will only move up 2, but I'm quite happy with how it looks. You can obviously forego the beads altogether, or you can directly pop the beads inside these little meanders that we've created for our trees. So I'm going to finish that off and I'll meet you back in a sec. So the second garland attaches in exactly the same way as the first. You've got lots of options in how you can add sparkle to this design as to whether or not you want to go monochrome or if you want to add different colours. So all I'm going to do now is just to add a jump ring through that double spiral where we began, making sure that I add my earring finding in the correct orientation, which is something that I am always prone to do wrong. So let's close up this jump ring. You may need to use 2 jump rings if your orientation on your earring finding is not correct, or you could find an earring finding that is large enough to go directly into that double spiral. So there are your tree design earrings, or house decor if you prefer. Something of a statement piece. You can always put them on the tree if you prefer. Thanks so much for watching. Merry Yulemas to you. I hope you have a lovely day. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share and hype the video, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.